The second the champagne glass shattered against his shoes and the chocolate cake smeared across his face, the entire investment summit went silent because everyone in that room believed. They had just witnessed the public humiliation of the most powerful Black CEO in Silicon Valley, but none of them knew that within the next hour, the woman who laughed while cameras flashed would lose a $4 billion deal, and the company her family built over 3 generations would begin collapsing. In real time, Darius Cole had built Novodyne Systems from a small warehouse startup into a global clean energy empire. His journey was carved from rejection, sleepless nights, and investors who once refused to shake his hand. Yet tonight, he stood in a custom black suit under crystal chandeliers inside the Grand Meridian Tower, where he was supposed to finalize a historic partnership with Aurora Crest Holdings, a legacy corporation run by heiress Victoria Langford, young, glamorous, and used. To obedience, the event had been branded as the deal of the decade: $4 billion in infrastructure contracts, government backing, international expansion, and photographers lined the marble staircase waiting to capture the handshake that would change markets forever. But Victoria had a different idea when she stepped onto the stage, holding a celebratory cake meant to symbolize unity. She smiled at the audience, then turned toward Darius and joked loudly that some people rise too fast without learning elite manners. Laughter rippled across the room, uneasy but present, and before Darius could respond, she pressed the cake directly into his face, frosting sliding down his beard, cameras exploding in bright flashes, executives gasping. Yet Victoria continued laughing as if she had performed harmless entertainment. Darius did not move for several seconds. He did not wipe his eyes. He did not shout. Instead, he slowly removed his glasses, cleaned them with controlled precision, and looked at her with a calm expression, so steady it made her laughter fade, because it was not the look of a man embarrassed. It was the look of a strategist who had just been handed undeniable leverage weeks earlier during negotiations. Darius had insisted on inserting a behavioral integrity clause into the merger contract, a clause allowing immediate termination without penalty if any executive action caused reputational damage or discriminatory controversy. Aurora Crest's legal team, confident in their dominance, skimmed over it, assuming it was symbolic language. Now, as clips of the incident began flooding social media, hashtags erupted, accusing Victoria of elitism and racial disrespect. Within minutes, Novodyne Communications Director released a brief statement reaffirming commitment to dignity and inclusive leadership, while internal analysts monitored Aurora Crest stock price, which had already begun sliding 3% as investors reacted to the viral footage. Victoria, sensing the mood shift, attempted to grab the microphone, claiming it was playful humor, but whispers spread across the ballroom and several international delegates quietly stepped back from photo lines. Darius finally spoke, his voice steady, amplified across the hall, saying partnerships are built on respect, not spectacle. Then he nodded toward his chief legal officer, who pressed a tablet sending formal termination notices to Aurora Crest board members, regulators, and major shareholders. The alert appeared simultaneously across executive devices, including Victoria's phone. Her smile dissolved as she read the words "contract terminated, effective immediately, due to reputational breach without Novodyne proprietary grid technology." Aurora Crest expansion strategy was hollow, dependent entirely on Darius' patents and distribution network for $1 billion in projected revenue, vanished in a single digital transmission. The room felt colder as financial journalists began typing headlines. In real time, Victoria attempted to block Darius' path, demanding private discussion, but he simply adjusted his cufflinks and walked through the parted crowd, dignified, untouched, leaving her alone on stage with frosting-stained gloves and a collapsing narrative upstairs in Aurora Crest headquarters. Emergency conference calls were already forming, board members furious, analysts projecting further decline because competitors sensed vulnerability. Within 30 minutes, the stock dropped another 6%, wiping hundreds of millions from valuation, and activist investors began questioning leadership judgment. Meanwhile, Darius returned to Novodyne Command Center, where his strategy team activated contingency partnerships with 3 sovereign energy funds that had been waiting discreetly for any sign of instability at Aurora. Crest by midnight letters of intent were signed, redirecting billions into Novodyne independent expansion. Ensuring growth would exceed previous projections, Victoria sat in her glass office overlooking the city skyline, realizing too late that humiliation had not weakened Darius. It had empowered him because she mistook composure for fragility, and now the empire she inherited faced the most dangerous threat of all, public doubt. And as market screens glowed red across trading floors around the world, one truth became undeniable: the cake was never the scandal. The real shock was how quickly power shifts when arrogance collides with preparation, and Victoria Langford had just triggered a corporate earthquake she could not control. By the time the city lights dimmed, Aurora Crest Holdings was no longer celebrating a partnership. It was fighting for survival inside the 47th floor executive boardroom. Victoria Langford stood at the head of a glass table surrounded by screens filled with furious board members connecting from New York, London, Singapore, and Frankfurt. No one smiled, no one defended her. The viral footage of the cake humiliation had crossed 50 million views in under 2 hours. Commentators were dissecting her words frame by frame. Activists were demanding accountability, and major pension funds had begun issuing statements expressing concern over executive conduct. The company's stock had fallen 12%, wiping out billions in valuation, and credit agencies signaled potential downgrade unless stability returned immediately. Victoria tried to regain authority, insisting the market reaction was emotional and temporary, but the chairman cut her off, reminding her that perception drives capital, and capital was fleeing. Meanwhile, across the city, Darius Cole sat calmly in Novodyne Systems Strategy Center, reviewing live analytics with his executive team. He had anticipated retaliation and already prepared countermeasures. Instead of issuing aggressive attacks, he maintained disciplined silence, allowing public opinion to shape itself. His communications division released data highlighting Novodyne inclusive hiring record, community investments, and ethical leadership, reinforcing contrast without directly naming Aurora Crest. Investors noticed the difference, and confidence shifted rapidly behind closed doors. Aurora Crest's chief financial officer revealed that without Novodyne proprietary battery grid patents, 3 international infrastructure contracts would automatically dissolve within 60 days because Aurora lacked compatible technology. This meant not only loss of projected revenue, but exposure to breach penalties from foreign governments. Panic crept into the boardroom. As one director asked the question no one wanted to voice: how could legal have approved a contract with such an unforgiving termination clause? The general counsel admitted that the integrity provision had seemed standard, but now it functioned as a weapon. Victoria felt control slipping, and in a desperate attempt to reverse momentum, she announced an emergency press conference, claiming Novodyne had acted opportunistically, weaponizing a harmless joke for financial advantage. Yet, as she spoke, journalists displayed unedited clips of the incident and asked direct questions about cultural sensitivity and executive responsibility. Her responses sounded rehearsed, defensive, and markets reacted instantly. Shares dropped another 7% before the conference even ended. Inside Novodyne headquarters, Darius authorized Phase 2 of his strategy, confidential meetings with sovereign wealth funds and renewable energy ministries, who had previously hesitated to partner with Aurora Crest due to concerns about leadership volatility. Now those institutions saw opportunity. Within 24 hours, Novodyne secured provisional agreements exceeding the value of the collapsed deal, ensuring expansion into 3 new continents. Isabella, not present in this universe, Victoria realized too late that arrogance had triggered acceleration of her competitor growth rather than humiliation of his reputation. As midnight approached, Aurora Crest internal emails began leaking to financial reporters, revealing board disagreements and questioning of Victoria. Judgment, the narrative transformed from isolated scandal to systemic leadership crisis. Activist investor group Sterling Apex Capital publicly demanded her resignation, citing breach of fiduciary duty and erosion of shareholder value. Employees inside Aurora headquarters watched in disbelief as access badges of 2 senior executives were deactivated following emergency closed-door discussions signaling that accountability had begun. Victoria requested a direct call with Darius, her voice measured but strained. She proposed mediation, suggesting restoration of the deal under revised terms, offering Novodyne greater equity and public apology in exchange for partnership. Reinstatement. Darius listened patiently, then replied that leadership is measured not by apology after damage, but by discipline before action. He informed her that Novodyne had already secured diversified alliances and no longer required Aurora infrastructure. The calm certainty in his tone confirmed finality when the call ended. Victoria stared at her reflection in the darkened glass walls, realizing the empire she inherited was fracturing from within. Stock closed the next morning down 19%. Rating agencies placed Aurora Crest on negative watch, and regulatory committees announced preliminary review into corporate governance practices. What began as a moment of mockery had evolved into a full-scale corporate unraveling. Yet deeper beneath the surface, another development emerged. Novodyne quietly acquired minority positions in 2 Aurora suppliers, gaining influence over essential logistics channels, meaning even if Aurora sought alternative technology integration, would face costly delays. Victoria received notification that an emergency board vote would occur within 48 hours to determine interim leadership pending investigation. For the first time, she understood that humiliation had not destroyed Darius. It had activated a blueprint he had prepared long before stepping onto that stage. And as dawn broke over the skyline, financial news tickers displayed a simple reality: Novodyne systems expanding, Aurora Crest destabilizing, and the balance of power in the energy sector shifting permanently, not because of revenge, but because preparation always defeats arrogance. And Victoria Langford stood at the center of a storm she created, uncertain whether she would remain chief executive or become the cautionary tale whispered in future boardrooms about the night. A single act of spectacle erased billions. The morning of the emergency board vote arrived with a tension so thick inside Aurora Crest Holdings headquarters that even the elevators felt slower. Victoria Langford entered the executive floor wearing a composed expression, but behind the glass walls, conversations stopped as she passed, because everyone understood that the empire her grandfather built was hanging by a thread. Overnight, the stock had dropped another 5%, and international media framed the crisis as a case study in inherited arrogance versus earned power. Inside the boardroom, 12 directors sat in silence, legal advisors positioned along the walls, while financial projections glowed red on massive screens, outlining billions in evaporated valuation. The chairman opened the session with controlled disappointment, stating that fiduciary responsibility required decisive action, and Victoria was asked to present her defense. She spoke about vision, legacy, and resilience, arguing that markets overreacted and that she could negotiate Novodyne systems back into strategic alignment. Yet before she could finish, the doors opened unexpectedly, and the general counsel stepped in, holding a tablet displaying new filings submitted at dawn. The room shifted as the chairman read the update aloud. Novodyne Systems had completed acquisition of a significant minority stake in Aurora Crest through open market purchases during the stock collapse, combined with strategic partnerships through Sterling Apex Capital. This effectively positioned Darius Cole as the single largest voting influence outside the founding family. A wave of stunned whispers filled the room. Victoria felt her breath tighten because she realized the humiliation had not merely ended a deal, it had created the perfect entry point for a takeover. The chairman continued, explaining that regulatory approval for a special shareholder meeting had been fast-tracked, meaning leadership restructuring would be voted on within hours. and Darius had formally requested attendance to address the board. Minutes later, the doors opened again, and Darius entered not with triumph, but with composed authority, wearing a dark suit expression, steady. He greeted the directors calmly, acknowledging the gravity of the situation before speaking about long-term stability, ethical governance, and global competitiveness. He made no mention of the cake, no reference to the scandal instead. He presented a structured recovery proposal, conditional investment, infusion, technological integration, and immediate cultural reform in exchange for executive transition and appointment of an independent leadership committee. The directors listened intently because his plan was precise, financially viable, and already supported by key institutional investors. Victoria attempted to object, accusing him of opportunism, but the chairman interrupted, stating that shareholder value demanded rational decision, not emotional defense. The vote commenced. Electronic tablets lighting up around the table one by one. Confirmations appeared, removing Victoria as chief executive, effective immediately, appointing an interim board while negotiating strategic alignment with Novodyne Systems. The final tally displayed unanimous support except for her own. The room fell silent as security protocols quietly updated her access credentials. Deactivating executive clearance in real time. Victoria stood frozen, understanding that within 72 hours she had shifted from Heiress controlling a multi-billion-dollar empire to former executive facing public scrutiny. Yet, Darius surprised everyone with his next statement. He announced that Novodyne would not absorb Aurora Crest entirely. Instead, he would restructure it as a joint innovation entity, preserving thousands of employee jobs and honoring the founding legacy under new leadership. Built on accountability, the decision reframed the narrative instantly. Media outlets shifted tone from corporate revenge to strategic redemption. Employees who feared mass layoffs exhaled in relief, and global markets responded positively, with Aurora shares stabilizing for the first time since the scandal. As Victoria exited the boardroom, cameras awaited outside, capturing the moment she stepped into daylight, no longer as CEO, but as the woman whose arrogance triggered a corporate transformation. Meanwhile, Darius returned to Novodyne headquarters, where his team watched live coverage, not celebrating, but analyzing. Because true power required discipline, not spectacle. By closing bell, Aurora Crest stock rebounded 8% under the announcement of restructuring, and Novodyne valuation reached record highs. Analysts called it the most calculated turnaround in recent corporate history, yet the deepest shock was not the financial shift, it was the lesson embedded within it. A single act meant to humiliate had ignited a takeover engineered with patience, strategy, and restraint, proving that dignity under pressure can become the sharpest weapon in business. And as headlines across the world displayed side-by-side images of the cake incident and the boardroom vote, one truth echoed through every executive: sweet respect is not a courtesy, it is currency, and those who waste it risk losing everything.